What's up, guys? It's Kale. And yes, it's a vertical video again, but you won't be seeing my face for that long. Today we're going to talk about the thing that Trump's doing that would make it legal for employers to fire trans employees for just simply being trans. We're going to figure out if that is fake or not. So, I'm going to get some news articles pulled up. Y'all will hear me read them, or you can pause it and read it yourself. But it'll be coming directly from the sites, and we're gonna read a few of them, probably 2 or 3, so that y'all don't think that I just simply picked one that went along with what I'm saying. Alright, so this first one here is from NBC, and before I start reading it, I'm sorry if any notifications pop up. I'm recording this off my phone. See, there's one. I do apologize for that. Okay, let's read this. And again, if you don't want to hear me read it, just pause as I scroll and read it for yourself and turn the sound down so you can read it. Okay, NBC. Trump's fight to make transgender discrimination legal may make all sex discrimination legal again. In a new Supreme Court filing, the administration argued that using gender stereotypes as a basis for hiring or firing should be legal. As a measure of how far the Trump administration is willing to go to make sure that transgender people have no protection from discrimination under federal law, take just one small section of their brief filed with the Supreme Court on Friday. Sex stereotyping by itself is not a Title VII violation. In other words, Trump's lawyers are arguing that the section of the Civil Rights Act that prohibits employers from discrimination because of sex does not prohibit employers from discriminating on the basis of stereotypes related to sex. That is a wholesale rejection of major Supreme Court precedent and invites the court to wipe out protections that people have relied on for decades. And a ruling in their favor could drastically change workplace protection for all women, whether or not they are LGBTQ, and anyone who does not conform to the administration's preferred gender norms. That could include men with long hair and women with short hair, men who are primary caretakers of children or parents, women who wear pants, and women who work outside the home or are primary breadwinners. It is almost as if the Trump administration is arguing that if trans people might get protected from employment discrimination, then it is best there be no protections for anyone, which actually may be their endgame. But let's back up to where this case started. More than 5 years ago, Amy Stevens was fired from her job in Michigan when she informed her employer that she is transgender and would no longer hide that core part of her existence. After she was fired, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission sued her employer for violating federal law. Now her case, along with 2 cases involving men who were fired from being gay, is before the Supreme Court. The question presented in Amy's case is relatively straightforward. Is it unlawful sex discrimination under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act to fire someone because that person is transgender? Before the 2016 presidential election, the government had nearly universally said yes. But as of Friday, the United States, which initially brought the case through the EEOC, has officially switched sides. The Trump administration has weighed in to encourage the court to permit employers to fire an employee for being trans. The judges will ultimately decide whether, when an employee is fired because their employer doesn't like how they present their sex or the sex of the individuals to whom they are attracted, it is because of sex, which is illegal. In the most straightforward reading, it is difficult to see how firing someone for changing sex, not performing their assigned sex correctly, in the employer's view, or for being transgender, isn't firing them because of sex. But sometimes logic and textual reasoning don't win the day, and good old-fashioned reverse engineering political outcomes do. If the court side with the Trump administration and the employers in this case, and thus holds that it is presently lawful to fire LGBTQ people, they will be setting our legal system on a dangerous path which could lead to myriad unexpected harms. First, he'll be making it clear to employers across the country that they can go ahead and fire people simply for being LGBTQ. This would directly lead to catastrophic outcomes for many people, including loss of jobs and wages, health care, and escalating despair and annihilation. It would also validate, and potentially make legal, discrimination in a host of other contexts, including in education, health care, housing, the military, prisons, and by government officials. This seems to be the precise intention of the Trump administration, which has been systematically attacking LGBTQ people, and particularly trans people, since the first weeks after inauguration in 2017, which it rescinded guidance clarifying federal protections for transgender students. A few months later, President Donald Trump tweeted his ban on transgender people openly serving in the military, which is now in effect. In the past few months, the administration has proposed excluding transgender people from protections in healthcare, accessing homeless shelters, and now upping the game, defending the lawfulness of firing transgender workers before the Supreme Court alongside the Alliance Defending Freedom. Amy's employer, represented by the ADF, is not only arguing that it was lawful to fire her, but that it was in her best interest. The lead ADF lawyer for her employer, John Birch, explained in an interview that he believes it's healthier for people such as Stevens to try to align their mind with their biological reality rather than to change their gender. For this reason, he contends Amy's employer wasn't acting out of discriminatory animus, but rather out of love, both for Stevens and for employees. They drove this point home in their brief before the court, arguing the science regarding gender identity is far from settled, and there are deep disagreements over whether otherwise healthy bodies should be physically modified to align with the mind. The opposite approach, aligning one's mind with the body, has traditionally been the preferred methods for treating other dysphorias such as anorexia and xenomelia. This is really long. However, the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, and pretty much every other major medical and health group has weighed in on the side of Amy and made it clear that the exact opposite is true. For the ADF, it left citing for support an 88-year-old physician whose colleagues have wholly and publicly disavowed his views on trans people. But as cruel and insidious as their line of reasoning is towards Amy and other trans people, the reach of what the administration has advocated before the court, that sex stereotypes are not discriminatory, will, if accepted by the court, will also affect all workers who don't conform to traditional gender norms. That is why, while the immediate target may be LGBTQ people, the effects will be felt much more broadly if the Trump administration is successful. For people who aren't yet paying attention, perhaps it is time to mark October 8th, the day the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments in these cases on their calendar. Firing someone for being trans might sound okay to you, though it shouldn't, and you could be next under rules that are made while people are looking the other way. An examiner says something completely entirely different. Says no, the Trump DOJ is not trying to legalize anti-trans discrimination. Did the Trump administration really just ask the Supreme Court to legalize firing transgender workers? If you get your news from left-wing outlets such as BuzzFeed or the Huffington Post, you'd certainly think so. Dominic Holden on Twitter says, just in, Trump administration tells Supreme Court it's legal under federal law to fire workers solely for being transgender, saying Title VII's ban on sex discrimination doesn't apply to gender identity and trans status. Full story, and a link to BuzzFeed News. The reality is much more complicated, and a closer look at the Department of Justice brief in question shows the liberal media's coverage of this issue is steeped in, I'm not even going to attempt. What so-called BuzzFeed journalist Dominic Holden calls an aggressive step to set back LGBTQ rights nationwide is actually just the Trump administration advocating for the law to be enforced as it is written, not as his liberal friends wish it was. The issue in question is a case of alleged anti-transgender employment discrimination, where a transgender woman says she was fired for her gender identity. The legal question at hand is whether Title VII of the Civil Rights Act prohibits such discrimination. The Trump DOJ is simply pointing out that it clearly does not. The Title VII does not prohibit discrimination against transgender persons based on their transgender status. It simply does not speak to discrimination because of an individual's gender identity. The DOJ brief says, "Here is the relevant text of Title VII. It shall be unlawful employment practice for an employer to fail or refuse to hire or to discharge any individual or otherwise to discriminate against any individual with respect to his compensation, terms, conditions, or privileges of employment because of such individual's race, color, religion, sex, or national origin." The debate is over whether this law, as written, prohibits transgender employment discrimination. Not whether it should, but whether it does. And given the clear lack of the words gender identity, transgender status, or anything similar in Title VII's protected clauses, it's obvious that it does not. This is all the Trump DOJ is saying, that current anti-discrimination law does not protect transgender people, and if left-wing activists want to take charge, they must work to change the law, not ask judges to rewrite it by judicial fiat, however you say it. Yet the activist interpretation of Title VII says that the protection of biological sex as a class actually somehow applies to transgender people. The logic goes like this. A transgender woman who faces discrimination for, say, dressing as a woman, despite being male, is facing treatment that would not be given to a biological female. Thus, the discrimination is supposedly really rooted in sex discrimination, not transgender identity. As a result, they say anti-discrimination laws that protect sex also protect gender identity. This is clever if convoluted. Logic. But it doesn't really work. For one thing, the Title VII was passed in 1964. Are we really supposed to believe that lawmakers in the 1960s intended sex to encompass transgenderism? That's strange. They use big words, and I learn words by reading, and so if I say any of them wrong, I am very sorry. Credulity and reveals activists' claims as a blatant attempt to twist the law in their favor. Besides, the very basis of transgender theory, originally pushed by the left, relies on the fact that they define sex and gender as two distinct separate things. This theory says that sex, male and female, is tied to biology, whereas gender is a social construct associated with pronouns, wardrobe, and the like. A social construct, we're told, can change and is subject to self-identification. Whether you think of this argument, it is undeniable that it declares sex and gender to be two different things. This is how the left has convinced me to go along with transgender theory. If they'd had to convince Americans that people can truly change biological sexes, it would be much harder sell. On the very terms of transgender ideology, then, Title VII has nothing to do with gender. Yet liberals now want judges to declare sex and gender one and the same in activist interpretations of anti-discrimination law. They are trying to have it both ways. Their approach is intellectually dishonest and misguided. If we want anti-discrimination law to ban discrimination based on gender identity, you need to pass a new law. It's improper judicial activism to attempt to rewrite law in the courts as you wish it had been written and agreed to according on our diplomatic processes. Even if you disagree with Trump's administration's legal position, it is clearly a reasonable argument rooted in the rule of law, not based on anti-trans animus or even on any moral judgment about what the law ought to be, as media coverage has depicted it. Still, critics will ask why then President Trump hasn't supported the Equality Act, a so-called LGBT rights bill passed the Democrat-controlled House of Representatives that explicitly add gender identity and sexual orientation protections to Title VII. The answer, of course, is because the bill is filled with poison pills and crushes religious liberty. Advocates who truly want to increase anti-discrimination protection should take to Congress, not the courts, and work with both sides of the aisle to pass a bill that respects religious liberty but adds protections for gay and trans people that apply to secular employees. For that to happen, the malicious media, misrepresentations, rank partisanships, and false cries of bigotry must end. My take on those articles are: the media knows how to hype people up for different things, and they both know their target audience. They know who, pretty much who reads their articles. And so you've got the first one, that is trying to hype you up about how the law could affect non-LGBT workers, also just, gender non-conforming workers. And then you have the other one, the second one, which is trying to hype up the other side. And it's like, well, you see, it's just because, it's not worded right, no one's being attacked, it's all just crazy. People are crazy who, are getting hyped up about it. But like I said on Instagram, the comments on here will be turned off. You've probably already figured that out. You've probably paused and scrolled down and tried to write something. Because these articles, I didn't write them. I have absolutely no say in how they're written. And so if you want to comment on it or something, just go to their websites. I'll have them down below. I'll have them in the description. And find the contact us page and write them something. But the question at the beginning of the video, whenever it was daytime outside, was, is it fake? No, it's not fake. They're going to the Supreme Court about it, which obviously means it's not fake. You can even go to the Supreme Court website. If you know all that legal mumbo jumbo, you might be able to figure out what the documents say. I read them. It makes no sense to me. But technically, it already is legal for them to fire you based on your gender identity. And what this law, or whatever, would do is, all it would do is just make the employers able to do it without any repercussions. I do agree with the second one on either the bill needs to be rewritten or something to where it is more inclusionary, and take from the articles what you will. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say, so I'll see you guys later. So, bye-bye.